Lesson 1. God raises people in dark times. Have you ever looked at the world around you and felt like everything is falling apart? Have you ever wondered if the values you grew up with are disappearing right before your eyes? Many people reach a point in life where they feel powerless. They watch their families struggle. They see people turning away from God. They pray for change, but nothing seems to happen. And little by little, discouragement begins to settle into the heart. That was the kind of world Elijah lived in. Israel had abandoned God. Truth was no longer popular. Those who should have been leading the nation toward righteousness were leading it into spiritual darkness. It seemed as if evil was winning and faith was losing. Yet it was in that exact moment that God raised Elijah. Notice something important. God did not wait for better circumstances before calling his servant. He raised him in the middle of the crisis. Many people believe God can only use them when life becomes easier. They think they need fewer problems, more resources, more confidence, or more opportunities. But throughout Scripture, God often calls ordinary people during extraordinary times. Why? Because his power shines brightest when human strength is not enough. Maybe today you feel overwhelmed by the condition of the world. Maybe you feel like your voice no longer matters. Maybe you have spent years praying for loved ones who still seem far from God. Perhaps you have even wondered whether your best years are behind you. But Elijah's story reminds us of a powerful truth. God has not lost control. The darkness around you has not caught him by surprise. In fact, God often does his greatest work in the moments that seem most hopeless. The enemy wants you to believe that your influence is gone, that your prayers are wasted, and that your season of purpose is over. But God says otherwise. He is still looking for men and women who will stand when others sit down, who will trust when others give up, who will remain faithful when everyone else chooses compromise. Elijah was not powerful because of who he was. He was powerful because of the God he served, and that same God is still raising people today. The crisis may be real, the challenges may be difficult, but whenever darkness increases, God begins searching for someone willing to carry his light. The question is not whether God is still calling people. The question is whether you are willing to answer that call. Lesson 2. God is still providing, even when you can't see it. Have you ever gone through a season where it felt like everything was running out? Maybe your money was running low. Maybe your strength was fading. Maybe your hope was disappearing one day at a time. There are seasons in life when it feels as though God has gone silent. You pray, but the answers do not come. You wait, but nothing changes. You look around, and all you can see are problems, uncertainty, and reasons to be afraid. Many people know exactly what that feels like. They wake up every morning carrying worries nobody else sees. They smile in public while fighting private battles. They wonder how much longer they can keep going. Deep inside, they ask a question they are often afraid to say out loud. God, are you still taking care of me? Elijah faced a season like that. After announcing the drought, God sent him to the brook Cherith, a lonely and hidden place far from the crowds. Imagine what that must have felt like. One moment he was standing before a king. The next, he was alone beside a brook in the wilderness. To human eyes, it may have looked like God had removed him from his purpose. It may have felt like isolation. It may have looked like abandonment. But what Elijah could not see was that God was still working behind the scenes. Every morning and every evening, ravens arrived carrying food. The brook provided water. Day after day, God supplied exactly what Elijah needed to survive. Not more than he needed, not less than he needed, exactly what he needed. Sometimes we expect God's provision to arrive in dramatic ways. We look for miracles that shake the earth. But often, God's faithfulness is found in the small things we overlook. The breath in your lungs, the strength to get out of bed one more day, the unexpected phone call that encouraged your heart, the bill that somehow got paid, the door that opened when every other door seemed closed. Many people miss God's provision because they are only looking for spectacular blessings while ignoring the daily evidence of His care. The truth is that God's silence does not mean His absence. His hiddenness does not mean He has forgotten you. Even when you cannot see His hand, He is still moving. Even when you do not understand the process, He is still working for your good. Some of the greatest miracles in life happen behind the scenes where nobody notices them. Maybe today you feel like you are standing beside your own brook Cherith. Maybe life has become smaller than you expected. Maybe you feel isolated, forgotten, or uncertain about the future. Perhaps you are wondering why God has placed you in a season that feels hidden and lonely. But what if this season is not punishment? What if it is preparation? What if the place you call a wilderness is actually a place where God is teaching you to trust Him more deeply than ever before? Elijah learned something beside that brook that would stay with him for the rest of his life. His security was not in the brook. It was not in the ravens. It was not in the circumstances. His security was in God. The source of his provision was never the water or the birds. The source was always the Lord. And the same is true for you. Your job is not your source. Your savings are not your source. Other people are not your source. God is your source. Circumstances may change, opportunities may come and go, resources may rise and fall. But the God who sustained Elijah in the wilderness has not changed. He is still faithful. He is still providing. He is still watching over His children. And even if you cannot see it today, He may already be arranging tomorrow's provision in ways you cannot yet imagine. Sometimes God's greatest provision is not what He places in your hands. Sometimes it is the peace He places in your heart while you wait. And those who learn to trust Him in the hidden seasons often discover that He was taking care of them all along. Lesson 3. When one source dries up, God has already prepared another. Have you ever watched something you depended on suddenly disappear? A job you thought would last forever, a relationship you believed would never end, a source of income that once seemed secure, a season of life that felt comfortable and predictable. Most people know the pain of loss. They know what it feels like when something they trusted is taken away. And often the first emotion that follows is fear. Fear of the future, fear of uncertainty, fear that what was lost can never be replaced. That is exactly what happened to Elijah. God had sent him to the brook Cherith. There he had water to drink and food brought by ravens. Day after day, God provided for him. Everything seemed stable. Everything seemed under control. But then something unexpected happened. The brook dried up. Imagine standing there and watching the water level slowly disappear. Day after day, less water, less security, less certainty, until finally there was nothing left. Many people assume that if God is leading them, nothing difficult will happen. They think obedience guarantees comfort. But Elijah's story teaches something different. The brook did not dry up because Elijah had failed. It dried up while he was fully obeying God. Sometimes things end not because you did something wrong, but because God is preparing to move you into something new. One of the hardest lessons in life is learning not to place your trust in the brook. We all have our brooks. Things that make us feel safe, things we depend on, things we assume will always be there. But God never intended the brook to be Elijah's source. The brook was only a tool. God was the source. And sometimes God allows a brook to dry up because He knows we have started trusting the provision more than the provider. Maybe your brook has dried up recently. Maybe a door closed that you desperately wanted to stay open. Maybe your plans fell apart. Maybe the future you imagined no longer exists. And now you find yourself asking, God, what am I supposed to do now? The answer is found in Elijah's story. When the brook dried up, God's plan did not dry up with it. Before Elijah ever realized he had a problem, God had already prepared the next step. Before the water disappeared, God already knew where he was sending him next. Before the crisis arrived, God had already made a way forward. That same truth applies to your life. Nothing catches God by surprise. The situation that shocked you did not shock him. The door that closed unexpectedly was not outside his control. While you are grieving what ended, God may already be preparing what comes next. The challenge is that we often focus so much on what we lost that we cannot see where God is leading us. We spend months staring at a closed door while God is pointing toward an open one. We keep mourning yesterday while God is preparing tomorrow. Faith requires trusting God between seasons. It requires believing that the God who provided yesterday will also provide tomorrow. It means understanding that a dried-up brook is not proof of God's absence. Sometimes it is proof that God is calling you to move forward. Some of the greatest blessings in life only arrive after a season ends. Some of the most important chapters of your story begin with a painful goodbye. If the brook had never dried up, Elijah would never have experienced the miracles that were waiting for him in Zarephath. What felt like a loss was actually a transition. What felt like an ending was actually preparation. So if something in your life has recently dried up, do not lose hope. The same God who led you to the brook is still leading you now. The same God who provided in one season can provide in the next. Your source has never been the brook. Your source has always been God. And when one source dries up, it may simply be because he has already prepared another. Lesson 4. The miracle begins with obedience. Have you ever felt God leading you towards something that made absolutely no sense? A decision that seemed risky, a step that felt uncomfortable, a direction that looked impossible from a human perspective. Most people love the idea of miracles, but very few enjoy the process that comes before them. We want God to show us the entire plan before we take the first step. We want certainty before obedience. We want guarantees before faith. But God often works the other way around. He asks us to trust him first, and then he reveals what he was doing all along. That was the situation Elijah faced when God told him to leave the dried-up brook and travel to a place called Zarephath. At first glance, the instruction made little sense. The region was suffering from the same drought. Resources were scarce. People were struggling to survive. Yet God told Elijah that a widow there would provide for him. Imagine hearing that promise. A widow was one of the poorest people in society. She was not wealthy. She was not powerful. She was not the person anyone would expect to become the answer to a prophet's problem. From a human perspective, the plan looked impossible. But God's plans often look impossible before they reveal his power. Many people remain stuck because they refuse to move until everything makes sense. They keep waiting for perfect clarity. They keep waiting for all fear to disappear. They keep waiting for every question to be answered. Meanwhile, the opportunity God prepared for them remains untouched because they are unwilling to take the first step. Elijah teaches us something powerful. Faith is not understanding everything. Faith is obeying even when you do not understand everything. Obedience is often the bridge between God's promise and God's provision. Without obedience, Elijah would never have met the widow. Without obedience, he would never have witnessed the miracle of the flour and oil. Without obedience, he would never have experienced one of the most remarkable demonstrations of God's faithfulness. The miracle was waiting, but it was waiting on the other side of obedience. Perhaps there is an area of your life where God is asking you to trust him right now. Maybe it involves forgiving someone who hurt you deeply. Maybe it means letting go of bitterness you have carried for years. Maybe it means stepping into a new season despite your fears. Maybe it means trusting God with a situation that feels completely beyond your control. Whatever it is, obedience can feel frightening because it requires surrender. It forces us to release the illusion of control and place our confidence in God instead. And that is where many people struggle. They trust God with their eternity, but hesitate to trust Him with today's problems. They believe He can save their souls, but wonder if He can handle their circumstances. Yet every act of obedience becomes an opportunity to discover His faithfulness in a deeper way. One of the greatest tragedies is missing a miracle, because fear kept us from moving. Fear always focuses on what could go wrong. Faith focuses on who God is. Fear says, "What if I fail?" Faith says, "What if God is already working ahead of me?" Fear says, "This does not make sense." For me, faith says, "God sees what I cannot see." Elijah could not see the miracle waiting in Zarephath. All he had was a command from God, but that was enough. And sometimes that is all we have as well. We may not see the entire road ahead. We may not understand how everything will work out. We may not know where the provision will come from. But if God has spoken, that is enough reason to move forward. The greatest miracles in life often begin with a simple act of obedience. A step, a decision, a surrender, a willingness to trust God before the evidence appears. The miracle does not always happen when you are standing still. Often it happens when you take the step God has been asking you to take all along. And when you look back one day, you may discover that what seemed like the most uncertain moment of your life was actually the moment God began opening the door to something extraordinary. Lesson 5. Even faithful people face pain. One of the greatest disappointments many believers experience is the moment they realize that faith does not exempt them from suffering. Deep down, some people assume that if they obey God, pray faithfully, and try to live according to His will, life should become easier. They expect fewer problems, fewer losses, and fewer painful surprises. But sooner or later, reality confronts them with a difficult truth. Even faithful people experience heartbreak. Even those who walk closely with God face seasons of grief, confusion, and pain. This was the lesson the widow of Zarephath had to learn. She had obeyed God's instruction through Elijah. She had shared her last meal. She had trusted when trusting seemed impossible. She had witnessed God's miraculous provision day after day, as the flour and oil never ran out. Everything seemed to be moving in the right direction. Then tragedy struck. Her son became sick. His condition worsened until he finally died. Imagine her confusion. Imagine her heartbreak. She had done everything right. She had obeyed. She had believed. She had trusted. Yet she still found herself standing in the middle of unimaginable pain. Many people know exactly what that feels like. Perhaps you have prayed for your family, only to watch problems continue. Perhaps you remained faithful during difficult years, only to face another unexpected loss. Maybe you trusted God for healing and the sickness still came. Maybe you prayed for restoration and the relationship still broke apart. In moments like these, painful questions begin to rise. God, where are you? Why did you allow this? Have my prayers been in vain? These questions do not make you weak, they make you human. Even some of the greatest men and women in Scripture wrestled with similar emotions. The truth is that faith is not believing that pain will never come. Faith is believing that God remains present when pain does come. One of the enemy's favorite lies is convincing people that suffering is proof that God has abandoned them. He wants them to believe that hardship means God no longer cares. But the Bible tells a different story. Again and again, we see God working in the middle of painful situations. Joseph suffered before he was elevated. David suffered before he became king. Job suffered despite his faithfulness. Even Jesus himself was described as a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. Pain is not always evidence of God's absence. Sometimes it becomes the very place where His presence is revealed most powerfully. The widow could not see it at the time, but her darkest moment was setting the stage for one of the greatest miracles she would ever witness. What appeared to be the end of the story was not the end at all, and the same may be true in your life. Some people are ready to give up because they assume their pain means God has forgotten them. They look at their circumstances and conclude that nothing good can come from what they are experiencing. But God often does his deepest work in the places that hurt the most. He strengthens faith through trials, he develops character through struggles, he reveals his faithfulness in moments when human strength is no longer enough. This does not mean we should enjoy suffering. It means we should not allow suffering to convince us that God is absent. The same God who stood with the widow in her grief stands with you in yours. The same God who saw every tear she cried sees every tear you cry. He has not stopped caring, he has not stopped working, and he has not forgotten the promises he made. Perhaps today you are carrying a burden that nobody else fully understands. Perhaps your heart is heavy with disappointment, loss, or unanswered questions. If so, remember this. Your pain may be part of your story, but it is not the end of your story. The God who walks with his people through the valley is the same God who leads them out of it. And sometimes the greatest miracles are born in the moments that seem the most hopeless. What feels like an ending today may simply be the beginning of a testimony you cannot yet see. Lesson 6. God restores you when you are completely empty. Have you ever reached a point in life where you are not just tired, but empty? Not just physically exhausted, but emotionally drained, spiritually dry, mentally overloaded. A place where even praying feels difficult and hope feels distant. That is exactly where Elijah found himself after the victory on Mount Carmel. One of the greatest miracles of his life had just happened. Fire fell from heaven. False prophets were defeated. The people declared that the Lord is God. But right after one of the highest moments of his ministry came one of the lowest moments of his life. Jezebel sent a threat. And suddenly, the same man who stood boldly before hundreds of false prophets is now running for his life. He sits under a tree in the desert and says something heartbreaking, "It is enough. Lord, take my life." This is not weakness. This is exhaustion. There are moments when faith is not gone, but strength is. Moments when you still believe in God, but you don't feel strong enough to continue. And what does God do in that moment? He does not reject Elijah. He does not shame Elijah. He does not replace Elijah. God sends an angel. And the first thing the angel does is not give a prophecy, not give direction, not give correction. The angel brings food. Get up and eat. Because before God restores your calling, he restores your strength. Before he speaks to your purpose, he cares for your body. Before he sends you forward, he makes sure you can stand again. Elijah eats, then he sleeps, and God lets him rest again. This is deeply important. Sometimes spiritual recovery starts with physical recovery. Many people think they need a new revelation, when what they really need is rest. They think they are losing their faith when they are actually just exhausted. And then something powerful happens. After Elijah is strengthened, he walks for 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of God. But notice this. The journey was only possible because God first restored his strength. There is a lesson here that changes everything. God does not only call the strong, he strengthens the exhausted so they can continue the journey. Maybe you are in a season where you feel like Elijah under the tree. Tired of fighting, tired of trying, tired of being strong for everyone. This lesson is for you. God is not finished with you, but he may be restoring you first. Because before the next assignment, there is restoration. Before the next mountain, there is recovery. Before the next miracle, there is grace to stand again. And sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is simply accept what God is offering you. Rest, provision, and time to be strengthened again. Because your story is not ending in exhaustion. It is being rebuilt in silence. Lesson 6. God restores you when you are completely empty. Have you ever reached a point in life where you are not just tired but empty? Not only physically exhausted but emotionally drained, spiritually dry, and mentally overloaded. A place where even praying feels difficult and hope feels far away. That is exactly where Elijah found himself after the victory on Mount Carmel. One of the greatest moments of his life had just happened. Fire had fallen from heaven, false prophets were defeated, and the people declared that the Lord is God. But right after that spiritual high came one of the lowest moments of his life. Jezebel sent a threat, and suddenly the same man who stood boldly before hundreds of prophets is now running for his life. He sits under a tree in the desert and says something heartbreaking. "It is enough. Lord, take my life." This is not weakness, this is exhaustion. There are moments when faith is not gone but strength is. Moments when you still believe in God but you no longer feel able to continue. And what does God do in that moment? He does not reject Elijah. He does not shame Elijah. He does not replace Elijah. God sends an angel, and the first thing the angel does is not give a prophecy, not give direction, and not give correction. The angel brings food and says, "Get up and eat," because before God restores your calling, He restores your strength. Before He speaks to your purpose, He cares for your body. Before He sends you forward, He makes sure you can stand again. Elijah eats and then sleeps, and God lets him rest again. This reveals something powerful. Sometimes spiritual recovery starts with physical recovery. Many people think they need a new revelation when what they really need is rest. They think they are losing their faith when in reality they are just exhausted, and then something powerful happens. After Elijah is strengthened, he walks for 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of God. But notice this: the journey only becomes possible because God first restored his strength. There is a lesson here that changes everything. God does not only call the strong, He strengthens the exhausted so they can continue the journey. Maybe you are in a season where you feel like Elijah under the tree, tired of fighting, tired of trying, tired of being strong for everyone. This lesson is for you. God is not finished with you, but He may be restoring you first, because before the next assignment, there is restoration. Before the next mountain, there is recovery. Before the next miracle, there is grace to stand again. And sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is simply accept what God is offering you: rest, provision, and time to be strengthened again. Because your story is not ending in exhaustion, it is being rebuilt in silence. Lesson 7. God gives strength for the long journey. Have you ever looked at your life and felt like the road ahead is too long for your current strength? Like even if you still believe, you are not sure you have the energy to keep going. That is exactly what happens to Elijah after God restores him under the tree. He has just been fed, he has just rested, he has just been strengthened. And now he is about to face something much bigger than a moment. He is about to face a journey. The Bible says that with the strength from that food he walked 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of God. Think about that. This is not a short trip. This is not a quick recovery. This is a long process that requires endurance. And what makes it possible is not Elijah's natural ability, but God's supernatural provision. This teaches something deeply important. God does not always remove the journey, but He always provides strength for it. Many people pray for an easy path, but God often answers by giving them endurance instead, because purpose is not only about starting well, it is about finishing well. Elijah did not feel strong because the situation became easy. He felt strong because God sustained him step by step, day after day, mile after mile. And this is how God often works in our lives too. He does not always show us the entire road at once. He gives us enough strength for today, enough grace for the next step, enough peace for the next decision, and enough faith to keep moving. Even when we do not see the full destination, maybe you are facing something that feels long and exhausting, a season that seems endless, a responsibility that weighs on you every day. This lesson reminds you that God does not waste your journey. He strengthens you inside of it, and even when you feel like stopping, His presence is what keeps you moving forward. Because the same God who fed Elijah for the journey is the God who is sustaining you right now. And if He has brought you this far, He will also give you what you need to reach the place He has prepared for you, one step at a time, one day at a time, until you arrive at the mountain He already planned for your life. Lesson 8. God's purpose does not end when you feel empty. Have you ever felt like your best days are behind you, like you have already done what you were supposed to do, and now you are just trying to survive the rest of the journey? That is exactly where Elijah was, emotionally. When he reached the mountain of God, he had seen fire fall from heaven. He had confronted kings. He had experienced miracles, but he also ran in fear, felt exhausted, and even asked God to take his life. And now in his mind it feels like everything is fading, like his story is slowing down. But God shows him something powerful. Purpose is not defined by feelings. After all the exhaustion, after the fear, after the collapse, God speaks again and gives him new instructions, new direction, and new assignments. This reveals a truth many people miss. Your feelings do not cancel your calling. Elijah thought his mission was over, but God still had kings to anoint, leaders to prepare, and a successor to raise. This means that even when you feel finished, God is still writing your story. Many people believe that God can only use them in their strongest seasons, but Elijah's life proves something different. God also works through broken seasons, tired seasons, and quiet seasons, because purpose is not powered by human energy. It is sustained by divine will. And what feels like an ending to you may actually be a transition in God's plan. There are moments when you look at your life and think nothing significant can come out of it anymore. But God sees what you cannot see. He sees the legacy still ahead. He sees the people still to be impacted. He sees the work still unfinished, and He continues to call you forward even when you feel like stopping. This lesson is clear. Exhaustion is real, emotions are real, but they are not final. God's purpose does not depend on how you feel in the moment. It depends on what He has already declared over your life. And if He has not finished the story, then you are not finished either. Even if you feel empty, even if you feel tired, even if you feel like giving up, God is still calling you into what comes next. Lesson 9. God meets you in your darkest moments of weakness. Have you ever reached a point where you are not just tired, but emotionally broken, where even simple things feel heavy and you start questioning your own strength? That is exactly where Elijah goes when he leaves everything behind and runs into the wilderness after the victory on Mount Carmel and the fear triggered by Jezebel's threat. He isolates himself, sits under a tree, and enters one of the most fragile emotional states in his entire journey. He is no longer standing before kings. He is no longer calling down fire. He is no longer speaking with boldness. Instead, he is alone, vulnerable, and asking God to end his life. And what is powerful here is not just Elijah's weakness, but God's response to it. God does not abandon him. God does not ignore him, and God does not condemn him. Instead, God meets him in that very place, in the desert, in silence, in exhaustion, in emotional collapse, and begins to restore him step by step. This shows a truth that changes everything. God is not only present in your victories, He's also present in your breakdowns. Many people assume they need to hide their weakness from God, but Elijah teaches the opposite. It is in weakness that God reveals His tenderness. It is in exhaustion that God reveals His care. And it is in brokenness that God begins rebuilding strength. The desert becomes a place of encounter, not abandonment. And what feels like isolation is actually divine attention. Maybe you are in a moment where you feel distant, disconnected, or overwhelmed by your own thoughts. This lesson reminds you that God is closer than you think, not waiting for you to become strong again, but already present in your weakness, feeding you, restoring you, and guiding you back to purpose. Because even in your lowest moment, you are not forgotten, you are not ignored, and you are not alone. God still meets people in their darkest places and brings them back to life slowly, gently and faithfully. Lesson 10. God is not done with your story, even when you think it is over. Have you ever felt like your story has reached its final chapter, like too much has happened, too many mistakes, too many losses, too much exhaustion, and now all that is left is just waiting for the end? That is exactly how Elijah felt at his lowest point, sitting under the tree in the desert, overwhelmed by fear, pressure, and emotional collapse. He believed his mission was finished, his strength was gone, and his future no longer mattered. But God responds to him in a way that completely reshapes the meaning of his life. Instead of confirming his despair, God redirects his purpose. Instead of ending his journey, God renews his assignment, and instead of closing the story, God expands it. This reveals one of the most powerful truths in the entire life of Elijah and Elisha. Your conclusion is not defined by your feelings in your lowest moment. Many people make the mistake of interpreting pain as an ending, but God often uses pain as a transition. Elijah thought everything was over, but God still had kings to raise, prophets to anoint, and a successor named Elisha who would carry the mission forward. This means that even when you feel like nothing more can come from your life, God still sees continuation, God still sees impact, God still sees purpose unfolding beyond your current season. And what you call the end, God may be calling preparation for something greater. This lesson is a final reminder that despair is not prophecy, exhaustion is not destiny, and failure is not your identity, because as long as God is involved in your story, there is always more ahead than what is behind, even when you cannot see it, even when you cannot feel it. Even when you believe you have reached your limit, God is still writing, still shaping, still guiding, and still preparing what comes next. Your story is not finished, because God has not said it is finished.